Hello and welcome to the 17th I Measure You Research Review. This week, Jaime and I are fortunate enough to be joined by Stu Cormack, who is an Associate Professor at Australian Catholic University and Head of the Performance Programme at the SPRINT Research Centre. Thanks for joining us, Stu. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Oh, no worries, guys. Good to be on.
Great stuff. So we'll dive straight in. Stu, it'd be great to get a little bit of background on yourself. I know you don't like doing these interviews too much. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do and how you've got there, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I've been at ACU now. I think it's sort of coming on eight or so years. And it was really fortunate that when I left high performance sport in a full-time role, that there was an opportunity at ACU, and at the time it was Professor Justin Kent, who was the head of school. He's now moved on to be the deputy dean of the faculty, and he sort of took a punt on someone who wasn't a career academic but was coming from the applied world, and he sort of thought, maybe there's some benefits to what the school can offer by getting someone who's, come from a real industry focus as well as having a little bit of a foot in the research world. So I was really lucky there. But, prior to that, I've been fortunate to spend sort of 20 plus years in high performance sport, in full-time roles. I worked at the AIS in the lead up to the Sydney Olympic Games, which the anniversary of is just sort of upon us. So I know that's a long time ago now. It was an amazing time. Previous to going there, I'd worked in AFL football, but that was back in the days, believe it or not. AFL footy was part-time, so all the players had jobs and all the coaches worked other things, and then we came at 4 o'clock and we trained, and so that was my first experience with what you called high performance sport then in Australia. Then I went to the AIS in that 4-year lead up to Sydney, and it was an amazing time because you guys know what it's like. Funding tends to go in line with when you're hosting these big events. So, yeah, lots of money around to have full-time residential programs in Canberra at the AIS. So I got to work with a massive range of sports and the staff involved with, with those sports. So I was sort of immersed in it, and I learned so much about, everything from rowing to swimming to water polo to volleyball to, judo, like just fantastic. And then after that, I went across to another AFL club in Perth, the West Coast Eagles Football Club, which is just a wonderful organisation. I was there for 8 years and really lucky. We were quite successful. We won a premiership and played in another grand final, and other good performances across seasons, and also worked with wonderful people there. And then family sort of got to the point where when you live in Perth in Australia, I'm not sure if you guys know, it's actually the most isolated capital city in the world. So when you live in Perth and you're in a national competition, you spend a lot of time travelling to the other side of the country. So you're away for, 3 days every fortnight.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite challenging. Funny thing is, what that taught me in that environment is that you can, I reckon, in high performance sport, you can get a lot wrong when there's big margins for error. When you travel to and from, another 3 time zones every second week, your margin for error shrinks. So I learned a lot about doing things really precisely and the importance of consistency and good practice. But, included with what I learnt then was having 2 kids very young. My wife left in Perth by herself when I travelled, and that got to the point where that was a bit tough. So came back to an offer at an AFL club in Melbourne. And I've said this before, that didn't go so well. And like most of us, you end up, you're either just been sacked or just about to be sacked. And, I've used that line a few times, and that's what happened. So I thought, I'm not sure about this anymore. I still love the content, but I didn't want to do it full time. So moved to academia at ACU, and whilst doing that, I've been lucky to work in consultancy type roles to keep a foot in the door of the real world day-to-day of high performance sport without the stress of job loss that those guys go through. Yeah.
Stu, that's a really interesting background. We've obviously asked Shona and Dave, your two counterparts in Sprint, this question. How did your involvement in the Sprint Research Centre, come about? Was it a conversation with you and Dave? Was it over a couple of months, or was it quite a off the cuff? Stu, are you in? Yes, I'm in. Or how did that come about?
Oh no, the reality is I was probably the oldest bloke involved who was involved in sport performance research. Let's be honest, we got some talented people who are far younger than me. No, look, I guess I've been fortunate enough over the years to work across a spectrum of projects that are, loosely around performance. And so that, coupled with my general life experience, I suppose, and as I say, my age, probably gives me some opportunity to hopefully kind of be in a role where you can help shape that and drag it all together, under a global sprint banner. So I'd say there's no particular skill, but look, the opportunity that we've been given by ACU to set up Sprint is just outstanding because, we've got these great people who are doing really good stuff anyway, and that would have continued. But to kind of bring that in under a coordinated banner and, almost formalise the opportunity to bounce off one another and to collaborate, and of course to fund some of the research, which doesn't happen for free, it is a really great opportunity. So, really happy to be involved.
No, that's awesome. And I said to Dave when we spoke to Dave a few weeks ago, and I think I've said to you on a couple of occasions, I truly believe that the research that's coming out of Australia and some of the guys you have in academia and performance over there is the best. So it'd be good to dive in a little bit to what's going on in the sports performance strand of Sprint and what you guys are looking at right now.
Yeah. Well, as I said, and you guys well know, performance is a really broad term, isn't it, when we talk about high performance sport. And so we've got a number of people involved who we nominally sort of label under that performance stream, but of course we're not tied to that. So some of the people, Grant Duthie, who you probably know, you know all these guys, Rich Johnson, Paul Tafari, Andy Townsend and John O'Weekly are sort of some of the primary group that are involved. And you'd know from those names that the breadth of research they're involved in is pretty huge. So everybody's off doing their individual projects. A lot of those projects involve multiple people from that group that I've mentioned, and also, perhaps Shona or Dave or other people that are more aligned to those particular programs. I guess all of the people in the group have their, maybe their strength or their real focus, but again, I think they're all broadly interested in general performance questions, and so that means that we can cover a lot of topics, I think, broadly. So Grant Duthie's looking at a whole lot of things. He's really strong in the validation area, so particularly from microtechnology and quantifying periods of peak intensity. So you probably have seen his work that he's done there with Jace Delaney and others looking at that in a variety of sports. So Grant's working hard in that across a range of areas, as well as other projects. Rich Johnson's got a real focus at the moment in looking at the role of strength and power in both performance and injury in a variety of sports, team sports particularly, the rugby league codes and Australian footy. Paul Tafari's across a number of projects. So we've got some stuff happening in mental fatigue, using the IMUs, for measuring various stride parameters and other aspects. Looking at some winter sport projects. We have that's a new realm for us, but we've got some good contacts. Will Morgan at the Victorian Institute of Sport, and looking at some landing stuff with winter sports athletes, validity, reliability, and test protocol development. Andy Townsend's probably our most, for want of a better term, physiology-based person in the research, the performance stream. So he's got a real focus at the moment on field tests of aerobic capacity, some validity and reliability assessment, as well as prescription from that. And also a real interest and has done some nice work in concurrent training. So he's continuing on that front. Jono Weekly, you probably know Jono's work. He's an absolute workhorse and a real interest in the velocity-based training. So he's done a huge amount of work. That's really been, for a guy of his age, super impactful, I think, on the profession, practically huge implications of that. So he's continuing that work, and that's including, validation and reliability work of different technologies for the purposes of measuring velocity and resistance training, and also extending his work on the effects of velocity loss thresholds on the fatigue response. So, yeah, it's a bit of a snapshot. As I said, it's pretty broad, but that's some of the work that's going on in the performance program. But as I say, those guys are also linked into other projects in the injury and the recovery stream with Dave, Shona, and other people in those streams.
Great, Stu. One thing that you did mention, obviously, performance has multiple umbrellas under it. So this is a very open-ended question. But talking about research in the performance sector, where do you feel there's a need or a gap? Are there any specific areas where you feel there's not enough research on that, or people are following a bit of dogma in one way? Where do you feel there's a gap? And once again, you can go into any area of performance that comes to the top of the mind, because I know there's about 30 things you can pick off.
Yeah, it's a good question, and of course I'm always going to put my spin on that. So that's going to be my take on the world, which the word according to Stu Cormack's not necessarily right. But, I think one of the things that's happened in our field, and I've mentioned this on a previous discussion I had online. Is a bit of a misunderstanding of what's sports science and what's coaching. So that's one thing. They have at the moment this delineation. Well, that's coaching and that's sports science. I've never understood that. So I think from a practical perspective, it's that translation from the research to the connection with the practice. So I think that's something that we need to do more on. But I think equally from a practical perspective, I think we need to get better, as this is a real interest of mine, is understanding the difference between what's important and what we can measure. So, the old saying, not everything that's important can be measured and not everything that's measured is important. Well, I think we're at that place at the moment, and so I think we've got an opportunity to do some work where we really identify where you can measure 1,000 things, but this is what's having the impact on the performance or the fatigue response or the likelihood of injury, and using that to guide training prescription and the assessment of monitoring training load etc., etc. That's a pretty broad answer. I know that doesn't get down to it, but we have tech. We can measure a lot of stuff, but I think we need to get to the point. And it might have somebody posted something the other day on social media where have we reached the end of the line with GPS, for example? And that's a really good example of what I'm talking about. We can measure the life out of a whole lot of things and speed and distance, but how much of it is actually important? So I think our focus on the research is honing in on, of all these things we can measure, what's actually important, and then what is it that we can't measure that we need to develop methods of assessing more validly and reliably. I don't know if that makes any sense.
100%. And I was actually, that was my my next question for you. I was going to bring to your attention that article. I think it was from Mathieu Lacombe at Paris Saint-Germain.
It was.
Because I found that article very interesting. Obviously, working in the space of wearable technology, we naturally are drawn to content where we're involved. I guess, and this isn't a shameless plug, by the way, and I'm not expecting an answer either way. But in terms of technology, Stu, obviously it's integrated throughout the Sprint Research Centre. It's integrated throughout performance in general. Where do you stand on the place of technology in sports science? Are you more of a people person? Do you think it should be people first, then technology? Or is there any technology, again, this is a conversation that's been battered around the Twitter sphere in terms of what technology can you not do without? What do you absolutely need to conduct your job?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're being really pragmatic, you could do without all of it. Because I and many others managed to run quite successful programs before there was a GPS unit or a force plate inside. I had a stopwatch, and I know how hard that was. Fine, that works. There's no problem. But we would assume that we can get more insight from some, technology to provide some more detailed information. And I think that's correct, but of course it relies on the fact that the information that we're collecting is actually important, despite the fact that 1,000 things can be measured, and then that we're actually using it effectively to make a decision that's going to impact the training process, the adaptation, and ultimately the performance. So, I don't think it's one or the other. But if you had to make a choice, you'd pick, well, I could do without it. But these days you wouldn't. So then it comes down to, well, how do you integrate that effectively into the coaching process? And that's why I keep coming back to, if we view sports science and tech over here and coaching and people over here, that's where the problem is. If the two become one, which is how they always should be, so the tail's not wagging the dog. The technology doesn't drive the training. It doesn't make the decision. It gives you a number that you have to interpret based on context to then make a decision about. So there's still a human element in the decision. If we rely on an algorithm predict, then we're in big trouble, because that's, like they say, all models are wrong. It's just that some are useful, and that's true. So you always have to have that human coaching, consider the context element to make use of that technology that might be available. But again, that's my take of the world, and other people could mount a pretty strong case. I think that I'm off, but that's how I kind of view it.
I really like that answer. I'm sure Dan would agree. I really enjoyed that answer, Stu. And then moving slightly away from that, one question that we are shown that I think is really pertinent is for you. Is there any PhDs, or are there any PhDs or postdocs coming up that you guys have available for anyone watching here that might be looking to study at ACUs? Anything coming up or available, anything in the pipeline that you'd like to throw out there?
Yeah, look, we've recently just advertised for a couple of PhDs, which have now been filled. But it's hopeful down the track that we will have more opportunities, and maybe looking at ways that we could extend those to international applicants. That can be a little challenging sometimes, but we know that it's global these days, sport. So if we can provide opportunities to potential applicants, no matter where they're based, that's something that we're hopefully going to be able to do down the track. And I think once we get through our first 12 months and have a couple of students up and running, that we're hopefully going to be able to provide more scholarship opportunities. Now, they could be internally funded. And one of the things that we're really looking to do is link with different industry partners, for example, to create co-funded PhD opportunities. And, that could be, a link with a professional club. It could be a link with a technology company. It could be a link with, any range of organisations really to try and increase those type of opportunities.
Fantastic. That sounds like an exciting, ACU is obviously an exciting place to be, so it sounds great that you're opening that up to international students potentially. Just one final question from me, Stu. Obviously, we talked earlier about your journey to where you are today and the relationship between elite sport and working within elite sport and research. And obviously, there's a massive connection between the two. Taking everything into consideration, do you think there is a best route, an easiest route, either from research to practice or from practice to research?
Yeah, geez, that's another good question. I reckon when I started, I would have probably thought there was one solution. Like most things, when you don't know too much, you think there's one way. But I think now there's many ways to get to a particular point. But I can't overestimate how important I think it is that if you want to work as a high performance sport researcher, that as much practical time as you can get really helps you. I just think it helps you talk the language of high performance sport. It's not an absolute necessity, because you might just spend time working with practitioners and get to understand what's important. And equally, you might be doing, more mechanistic research, which should never be undervalued, because that's really important to understanding, the building blocks of the application. But I think if you're working at the applied end of the research, and if I take myself, that's where I sit. We've done some mechanistic work and probably starting to do a little bit more of that. But I started out my research career because I wanted to answer a practical question. It was driven purely by, I want to understand this so I can make a training decision. So I was driven by practical experience and a practical. So I think regardless of how you get it, the insight that you get from the high performance environment is really important to helping shape the way you go about your research. And I went from practitioner and progressively got more into research, and now I'm still do some remote strength and conditioning coaching, which keeps me real. I still do some consulting. It all keeps me in the real world. But equally, there's people who've started out research-wise. So we had, for example, Josh Ruddy, who did his PhD, and Dave was the primary supervisor. I was involved in that project, and we had him embedded in an AFL football club in Melbourne. Now, Josh had started out as, he's a brilliant coder in R and data analyst and stuff. But he went into that environment and just thrived. He learned about application. He learned about day-to-day training environments. And so now his skill set's sort of just broadened so much and, far more an attractive option for roles in either field down the track, I think, because of it.
Great, Stu. I think that's on my side. I've got no more questions because I think it was the world according to Stu Cormack to me was really refreshing. So it's a very different chain of thought, which I really enjoyed. So thank you for that. I've got no more questions. Dan, anything from you?
No, I'm all done. I guess, Stu, if people want to find out more about you, about ACU or the Sprint Research Centre in general, are they best going about that in a certain way?
Yeah, look, you can feel free to jump on Twitter. My Twitter handle's @Stu Cormack. If you look up Sprint Research Centre ACU on Google, you'll come to our web page, and there's some further links there. Also, if you wanted to get in touch, you'd be more than welcome to get in touch via the links on that web page through email. So, yeah, happy to chat to anyone who we can be of help to.
Fantastic, Stu. Thanks again for your time. And guys, please do check out our YouTube page, I Measure You. And also, if you're considering the use of IMUs, then please check out the IMU Academy because there's some really good content on there and it's growing all the time. But for now, thanks, Stu, and we'll speak to you all soon.